Hi guys, you're welcome back to my channel. All right, so if this is your first time coming across my video, you're welcome. My name is Stella. Okay, so let's jump right into what we have today. Okay, so we're going to be making a three-quarter dress. Okay, now the length is 49 inches. Okay, but the video is going to be focusing more on the lower part, that's from the waist down, because I already have a video on how to draft the upper part. Okay, so let's jump right into it. Okay, this dress is lovely and I'd like you to stick to the end. Okay, so let's proceed with the drafting. Now, the materials I'll be working with, okay, so I'll be making use of this lace, that's the main fabric. Then I'll be using the raw silk as my interlining. Okay, and I'll also be making use of my lining. Okay, so I'll use the lining to turn the lace. Okay, so now that we have the materials out of the way, let's proceed into the drafting proper. Okay, now if you take a good look at the dress, the total length, that's from the shoulder to the three-quarter length, is 49 inches. Okay, now from her shoulder to her waist, which is her half length, is 17 inches. Okay, now if you subtract the half length from the total dress length, we'll be left with 32 inches. So that's the length that we'll be working with. Okay, now if you look at the dress, you can see that it has two steps. Okay, so now the main flay that I want, now the main flay length is 19 inches. Okay, so the main flay is the one immediately from the waist down. Okay, so the main flay length is 19 inches. Now the first step of the dress, which is the shorter one, is 7 inches. Okay, and the second step, which is the longer one, is 13 inches. Now if you want to know if your calculation is correct, you just add up the longer length, which is 13, and you add it to the main flay. That will give you 32 inches. Okay, so that shows that our breakdown is correct. Okay, so you may need to do this so that you'll be sure that your division is not that you don't end up with a longer length. Okay. Okay, so to the main flay length of 7 inches, I'll go ahead and add my 0.5 allowance, which is allowance for the joining, okay, to the main flare. Okay, now to the second step as well, we'll add 0.5 joining allowance, okay, to the main flare, and that's it. Now we're going to be using 180 degrees flare, okay, to cut this. Now let's proceed to calculate our radius. Okay, now okay, so let's calculate the radius for the main flare. Okay, now her waist round is 32 inches. Okay, and I'll add um my allowance. But before that, let me do a quick sketch so that we can understand what I refer to as my main flare. Okay, and the first and the second step. Okay, so this is it. Now that's my main flare. Okay, and that's the first step of the flare, and that's the second step. And I'll go ahead and label that as well. Okay, now for the main flare, which is the very first flare that joins to the half length. Okay, now her waist round is 32 and I added 4 inches because I want extra pleats. So the formula for 180 degrees flare is 3.142. Now I'll go ahead and divide my 36, okay, over 3.142, and I have 11.5. Okay, now remember that the length of the main flare is 19, then I'll add my 1 inch allowance, okay, which is 20. So if you add 20 to the radius, that will give me 31.5. Okay, so this is what I'll be folding on the fabric and I'll cut out. Okay, so and I'll be cutting the main flare on the lace and on the interlining. Now let's calculate the lining. Okay, so I want the lining length to be 23 inches. Okay, now I'll also add my 1 inch, okay, for hemming, and that's 24 inches. Okay, now to calculate that as well, remember that I told you that her waist round is 32, so I'll just add 1 inch allowance. Okay, and that's 30. Okay, so the length of the lining is 23 inches, and then we're adding just 1 inch for allowance. Okay, and that's 24. So to calculate the radius of the lining as well, okay, now her waist round is 32, and then we're adding 1 inch allowance, so that's 33. So 33 over 3.142, that will give us 10.5. Okay, now if you add the the length of the lining to that. That will give us 34.5. So I'll go ahead and bring our fabric so that we can cut. Okay, now this is the fabric. I went ahead to fold it into two. Okay, remember we are cutting a half circle, so I folded it into two. Now we will go ahead and cut out the radius. Remember that her radius is for the lining now. Remember that the radius for the lining is 10.5. Okay, so I'll come in with my tape and I will place it on the tip. Okay, so I'll place it on the tip of the fabric like I'm doing. Okay, and I'll go ahead and measure out my 10.5 round. Now note that when you're cutting a half circle flare, first of all, the formula, which is a constant, is 3.142. So whatever waist you're working with, you are going to divide it by 3.142. Okay, is a constant. Now, and I went ahead to divide my waist round, okay, by 3.142, and we have 10.5. Okay, now my radius is fully marked. Now I'll go ahead and mark the length of the lining. And remember I told us that the length of the lining is 23 inches. Okay, and I added just 1 inch for hemming. Okay, so that's 24 inches. Now I'll go ahead and mark that 24 inches out. Okay, so note that you can place your tape on the radius like I'm doing to mark out the length, or you can return the tape back to the tip of the lining. Okay, so I'm done marking out the length of the flare. Now I'll go ahead and come in with my scissors and I'll cut out. Okay, so I'll go ahead and cut out my lining now. Okay, and kindly know that I pinned this out down, okay, before I started cutting. Now when you're done, it's advisable you notch the middle point. Okay, now I'll also go ahead and cut out the main flare. Okay, I'll cut that on the raw silk. Okay, and same process, just the same process that I cut out the lining. Okay, and here it is. I've cut it out on my on the interlining. Okay, I'll go ahead and place it on the lace and I'll cut out. Okay, and here it is. All our cuttings are fully ready. Okay, so I've cut out the interlining. This is it. Okay, now I also cut out the lace and I cut exactly what I have on the interlining. Okay, so here's our lace, our interlining, and our lining as well. Now let's proceed to cut out the steps. Okay, now remember that the first step is 7 inches. Okay, and we're adding 0.5, so the first step is 7.5. Okay, and the second step um is 13 inches plus the 0.5 allowance, so that's 13.5. Okay, so we'll go ahead now to determine the extent of fabric that we're going to cut. Okay, so I'll come in with the interlining. Okay, now we'll go ahead and use our measuring tape to measure the lower part round. We're not measuring the radius. Okay, we're not measuring the waist, so I'm measuring the lower part. Okay, with my tape. Now this measurement is very important because this will determine the extent of fabric we are going to cut out for our gathers. Okay, so I'll go ahead and measure this round. Now what we have there is 1 yard, okay, which is 36 inches and 15 inches. Okay, so and if you add that up, if you add 36 to 15, that will give you 51. Okay, so and 51, remember that the fabric is on fold, so if you multiply 51 by 2, that will give you 102. Okay, so let's write down what we got. Now, from our measurement, we got 36, okay, 36 inches plus 15 inches, and that gave us 51 if you add the two together. Okay, now remember that the fabric is on full, so if you multiply it by 2, that will give you 102. Okay, so to know how many yards is inside 102, you divide it by 36, which is 1 yard, and you will have 2.8 yards. Okay, so that means this is the extent of the fabric that you need to cut out if you're not pleating. Okay, now because we need to pleat or gather the fabric, I'll go ahead and cut out 3 yards or 4. Okay, now this depends on the number of the quantity of fabric that you have. Okay, so I'll go ahead and cut out 4 yards of each of the steps. Okay, so for the first step of 7.5 inches, I'll cut out the length of 4 yards, and I'll repeat the same thing on the second step. Okay, so and here it is, I've cut out. Okay, now this is the 7.5 inches wide. Okay, and I cut out 4 yards. Okay, and I did the same thing on the second step. Second step width is 13.5. Now the length is equally 4 yards. So I'll go ahead and gather this round the lower part of the flare. Okay, so I'll gather it. You can pleat if you want. Okay, so I'll go ahead and maybe I'll pleat. Okay, round it, and I'll come back and show us. Okay, so here is the dress. Now I went ahead to join the upper part. Okay, so I've turned the upper part with my lining. Now for the lower part, I first stitched down the lace to the interlining. Okay, so the lace and the interlining is now one fabric. Okay, so and I attached it to the waist of the upper part. Okay, now you can see that I've not fixed the lining of the lower part. Okay, now the first thing I will do now is to go ahead and measure my hip length. Okay, so I'll use my pin to hold the waist. Okay, and I'll come in with my tape. Now her hip length from her waist to her hip is 9 inches. Okay, so I'll measure this down and I'll make a mark there. Now that's the extent of the zip. Okay, so this mark simply means that's where my zip is going to stop. Okay, so from that place I marked, I'll go ahead and stitch it down using my 1 inch. Okay, so from my mark downwards, I will use my 1 inch and close that line. Okay, and that's it. I'll go ahead and fix my zip. Now after I'm done fixing my zip, then I'll come in with our 2-step flare. Okay, and I'll stitch it round the circumference of the lower part. Okay, but before I gather them to the circumference of the lower part, I'll first join the 2 steps so that they become one fabric. Okay, then I'll go ahead and pleat it on the circumference of the lace. Okay. Okay, so and this is it. I went ahead to join my lining and I used the lining to turn the zip. Just a regular process of finishing an outfit with the lining. Okay, and this is it, guys. This dress is lovely. I mean, for me, it's 2 words. It's beautiful and it's classy. Okay, the 3/4 length is it for me. I mean, I think the stone zip give the back a different highlight. Okay, and I just cut out a straight fabric and I put the elastic in the middle. Okay, and I just fixed it, so it's like a cold shoulder sleeve. Okay, so this is lovely. I'd like you guys to try this style out and then you tell me what you think. Okay, in the comment section. If you have any question, I'm always glad to answer. All right, guys, so this is it. Kindly subscribe to my channel, like and share, and I'll see you in my subsequent videos. Bye.